this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2022 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the Young Adult Literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in its capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota and the Young Adult Literature category through the generosity of Expedition Credit Union. My name is Laura Zimmermann. I write books for young readers. My novel, My Eyes Are Up Here, won the 2021 Minnesota Book Award in this category. With that award, I also got the excellent job of hosting a panel of this year's finalists, who I will introduce in just a moment. First, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land on which most of our panel are recording today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of story in the place now called Minnesota. Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we all work together to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm pleased to be joined by Ted Anderson, author of The Spy Who Raised Me, illustrated by Gianna Miola and published by Graphic Universe Learner Publishing Group. Alan Berks, Leah Cooper, and Becca Hart, co-authors and illustrators of In My Heart, The Adoption Story Project, published by Wanderlust Productions. Kalena Miller, author of The Night When No One Had Sex, published by A.W. Teen, Albert Whitman. And Michel Prince, author of The Amalgam, published by Fire and Ice, Melange Books, LLC. Congratulations to each of you for the Minnesota Book Awards finalist recognition of your work. To give listeners a chance to hear more about you and your excellent books, I'm going to begin with a round robin question for all of you, and then we will follow up with more specific questions about each book. I think for our team of collaborators, Alan Berks will be the respondent for our first round robin question. Secrets play a part in all of this year's finalist books, sometimes deliberate, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes kept for self-preservation, and sometimes terribly misguided. What role do secrets or revelations play for your characters? I think we will start with Kalena.
Hi, everybody. As Laura said, my name is Kalena Miller, and I am the author of this book right here. So one of my favorite things about The Night When No One Had Sex, and one of my favorite things writing it, was that it is 4 different POVs that rotate throughout the night. And one of the best things for me about writing multiple POV books is that every character has different knowledge. Sometimes that's the same knowledge that the reader has. Sometimes it's different knowledge than the reader has. That's one of the forms of irony. I don't know if anybody's an English teacher. It's one of them, I swear. And so for me, that's really fun from a craft perspective, because I get to think about what kinds of tension we can create when the audience knows things that the character doesn't, or vice versa. But also that gives me a space for a whole lot of secrets. So one of my characters just found out that she got off the wait list at what she thought was her dream school, and now she's reconsidering. Another one is struggling with an autoimmune disease and is withholding information about how much that's affecting her throughout the night. And then we have on the flip side a character who says literally everything that passes through her head, which creates its own problems in life, as it does in fiction. So I think for me, secrets were a cornerstone of this book, both because there are so many characters who are interacting throughout the night, but also because it happens all in one night. And so we have to like kind of amp up the tension that way. And so I'm interested to hear what everybody else, how secrets are in their books.
Thank you. That was fabulous. Alan, let's bounce it next to you.
Hi. I wish I had remembered to bring the book so that I could hold it up, but it's around somewhere. And thank you for having us. And oh, thank you, Theodore. Thank you for holding it up. Thank you for having all of us on. And I'm going to speak for the group on this question, and we'll rotate it around. The whole project begins, I think, with this, with things that we don't talk about. that's what inspired us initially to want to get these stories, because the subject of adoption is one that isn't really talked about honestly in the mainstream media. We have some movies that kind of romanticize it and show it from one perspective. So from the beginning, what we do as an organization, and then also what we wanted to do with this story, was to hear all of those stories. And of course, we wound up uncovering the way in which secrets have been kept about people's birth records, which many people still can't get a hold of, about who their family is, if it was or wasn't told to them. And then we put all of this into a story, a kind of adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, in which our main characters fall down the rabbit hole and uncover the dark side, or not the dark side, the shadow side of everything. So the subject itself is one that is kind of kept under wraps, and then within that, individual stories involve literal secrets that were kept between families. And then in the Alice in Wonderland story, there's this whole world that people are suddenly becoming aware of. So, for us, it's very much about uncovering those things. It's a story of telling the stories that need to be told in a community that everybody should be talking about, and that is another way of defining family, and that affects families of all people in families of all ages. So secrets definitely seem to be a spark for what we did, for sure.
Thank you so much. Ted, this is a question that should be right in your wheelhouse, so I'm going to kick it over to you now.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, it's my book, The Spy Who Raised Me, illustration by Gianna Miola. And I hope I'm pronouncing Gianna's name correctly, because she and I've never actually spoken like over voice chat. We've talked a lot by email and by Twitter chat and a lot of other things. I have never actually heard her voice. If I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, I'm really sorry, Gianna. It is a more lighthearted take on the subject of secrets, because it's about a girl who goes by JB, whose real name is Josie, who discovers that not only is her mother secretly working for a shadowy organization and has been trained to work as a secret agent without anybody's knowledge, so has JB herself been brainwashed and implanted with a whole bunch of code phrase triggers that turn her into a super spy. And the main part of the book is realizing why has this been done to her, and what did her mother think that she was doing for her, and why has her mother kept it secret all this time, and what are the consequences of that secret. And it's a lighter look on the subject of secrets, despite the fact that this is an action spy thriller, and there's more than one explosion throughout the book. It's more about the idea that people keep secrets for what they think are the best reasons possible. They keep secrets because they think it will help others, it will make their life better, it will in some way enable them to live a more normal life, or to live a better life than they could otherwise. But at the same time, secrets really have a tendency to kind of get out of hand and dictate exactly what happens to a person in a way they don't like. That's being very vague, but that is, I don't want to reveal too much of the book too. But it's also just, like I said, it's a lighter look at secrets, and especially secrets between a mother and a daughter, or parents in general and their children, and how the parents often think they're doing the best possible thing, and it turns out to not really be so. Yeah, is that good?
Thank you. That was great. Michelle, can you talk to us about secrets?
Hi, sorry. I wrote the amalgam. It's the first in a series, and I think mine is the self-preservation secrets. I think part of it is when you're a young adult, when you're moving from that elementary school where you tell everything and you trust everyone, you kind of slip into a world where you have to start questioning people's motives more as you get older, and you start seeing things, and kind of like those family secrets start coming out. And so that's part of it. This book is about kids that were all born in the year 2000 that all suddenly became mutations. And Riley is the main character, and he can push people. So if he wants you to do something, he just has to think about it and you'll do it. And you find there are people that can shift. There are people that can do what's called facilitating and grabbing, which is pulling anything out of a picture. So they have all these powers, which of course turns the government all the governments around the world are trying to capture all these kids and train them and do what they can with them. So then the kids are on the run. So you have so they have their own little world that they have to create and hide and use their powers if they can to do that. So, and people are looking at them as it's a single threat. We could just take them all out, all the kids in the year 2000. And then you have the kids that don't really want to show their hands. We have a girl in there named Aggie who is technically what we call a Harvey, which is anyone who doesn't have powers from the year 2000. They're called a Harvey, and she doesn't want to. She has powers she doesn't want to show, and so because she doesn't want that stigma, much like all the kids that are born there that are Harveys don't want that. So for me, I guess the self-preservation, the when you're growing up, you have to learn these different things, and you have to learn that some people don't have the best intentions. So that's kind of where their secrets come from.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. That was a fantastic warm-up. I'm going to now direct a question to Becca and Leah about their book that they collaborated with Alan on, In My Heart. In My Heart is a graphic novel, but it's also a play. And to me, also feels like a dream and a meditation and a conversation. It's a project of 3 creators, but also dozens of collaborators, and really, in some ways, hundreds of voices. Tell us a little more about how you layered and honored those multiple perspectives, sometimes perspectives that felt contradictory, but somehow made a coherent whole. What was eye-opening about that process for you? And I know you're all theater people, so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how that helped or hindered turning this story into a book.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I could talk a little bit about all the collaboration involved, and I'll leave it to Becca to talk about the challenge of transitioning from theater to page. It literally was hundreds of people. Even before it was a book, we make plays different than a lot of theaters. We don't start with a script. We start with picking a community of people who we think have amazing stories that more people ought to know about or understand better. And so we just started with the entire community of adoption, which includes not just adoptees, of course, but also adoptive parents, birth parents, siblings, social workers, people who spend their childhood in foster care and age out. And we did dozens of story circles and interviews over a couple of years and talked to literally hundreds of people, gathering their stories. And then the way we make our plays is we pick a classic piece of literature, and that can be a good container for lots of points of view. So that's how we ended up with Alice in Wonderland, because it was a good container for all of these stories. And inevitably, we always pick a classic piece of literature that has space for the contradictory truths, because in any community, if you talk to enough points of view, you're definitely going to get contradictions, sometimes from the same person. And I think, this community, there's so much going on with stigma, there's so much going on with secrecy, there's so much going on with identity, that there are just lots and lots of truths, and they go way beyond Anne of Green Gables, trust me. So one of our favorite exercises in story circles is we ask people, what are the myths, the things that aren't true, that people think are true? And what we look for often is, where do people have contradictory answers to that question? Like, this is true and this is not true. One example would be, as an adoptee, I know exactly who I am. And also as an adoptee, I have no idea who I am, for example, right? I don't think there's an easy answer to how all those points of view make it into the play. It involves a lot of Post-it notes, to be really honest. We end up taking every story and putting it on Post-it, and then just covering walls and walls and walls with all these colorful Post-its, looking for the common themes, looking for ways that we can, it's not documentary theater. We don't tell one person's story beginning to end, right? We want all the voices in there. We totally fight the single protagonist mythic hero structure. We're much more about like, no, it's a whole community story. And so what we do is we look for ways we can aggregate people's stories into like, okay, this is one character's through line, and this is, a scene that can contain all these points of view. The other thing I'll say that we do is we really embrace the Greek chorus structure, which is lots of voices just jumping in. So the story takes place at a party, so that there's lots of people just running around who can just randomly say things, that can contradict something somebody else just said. There's lots of arguing in our plays. Anyway, point is, the community collaboration piece of it is also the reason we ended up making a graphic novel, because in addition to inviting all of these folks to share their stories that we turn into a play, we invite people from the community to be in the play. So we have these enormous casts where over 2/3 of the actors are community members alongside professional actors. And for a lot of them, they've never done anything like this before in their life. And when it's over, they're like, what just happened? When are we doing that again? And how can I, bring my other 100 family members to see it? So there was a lot of questions after the show was done around when we were going to do it again. And, as theater people were like, we're not, that's too hard, but that's not a satisfactory answer for them. So we just kept thinking about how we could capture this into a format that could be shared again and again, and could be shared maybe across generation as people grew up, And I know all of you are book people, so you're like, duh, I know a format that lasts forever. But for us, it was kind of a leap, But luckily we knew Becca, who is this really talented theater artist, a performer, and a genius illustrator. And I think it was because of her illustrations, that we had this idea. Video doesn't capture theater very well, but we had this idea that a graphic novel could really capture that sort of fantastical quality that theater and the story had. So maybe here I can hand it off to Becca to talk about how we got it to the page.
Nice hand up. Hi, I'm Becca. I illustrated In My Heart, the adoption project, which I snagged because Theo had one, so I thought I'd get mine too. Totally agree with everything that Leah said. I'll chat a bit about how it's similar and different to theater. I really like this question because my initial reaction was, oh, it's totally different from theater. It's almost a little bit more like film in the sense that I worked with Leah and Alan just like to really craft what we wanted, and not only per page, but per box, per square on a page. And you just like in film, you get to control what's in the foreground, what's in the background, what's the lighting, like what's the angle of like the everything. And so in that sense, it's very different from theater. But I was thinking about this more this afternoon, and one element that I think plays into the community-based narrative that Wonderlust Productions always have are the people in the backgrounds who are kind of speaking to this subtext. So you have someone in the foreground saying something like, just like, well, she can't be your daughter. She doesn't look like you. And that's one narrative. But then behind her, maybe you have two people with like two very different like body language reactions, even in just like one little panel on a page. And that is something that, yes, you can do in film, but that's something really particular about theater, where if everyone in the room is focusing on the right point, then you get so many little different like pockets of perspective just from one moment, which makes for both a really, really rich theater production. And I was so glad that we found a way to like transfer that into this graphic novel concept. And then there are big issues like, oh, how do we do a musical number? And like, oh, how do we, how do we make the surprises surprising? One conversation that was fun with Alan and Leah is that when we were like, oh, when they go out into the garden, I was like, we can have some fountains, we can have some like topiaries, we can have a maze. And they were like, oh my gosh, like the budget, we can have whatever set we want because we're just drawing it. So we really got to explore and expand like the settings and, the characters' costumes and everything like that. And so that it was fun to like find the differences and the similarities between theater that we love and books that we all love and graphic novels, which I love. And I hope now Alan and Leah have a taste for as well.
Thank you so much. I'm so proud of my question because it yielded your brilliant responses.
That was you. Thank you.
I'm also a contributor to this in that I just teed something up, and you guys were brilliant. We're wonderful. So thank you so much for that. My next question is going to be for Kalena. So for me, the night no one had sex is really a lot about expectations. Your characters, of course, have expectations about first-time sex, but they're also facing all the expectations you face when you're about to turn 18 and graduate from high school and take the next step into your lives. Some of those are internal expectations and some are external. So what is it that made you want to write about this moment in particular? And I know you write other things as well. So as a writer for young people, what role do milestones play for you in thinking about what you want to write?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'll kind of jump to the first part of that first, logically. And I think the entry point to the story obviously is a sex pact. This group of friends, they all want to have sex the night after prom. And so, of course, there are expectations swirling around them about what that will be like, what that should be like, what they've been told that should be like, all of these things that are, of course, like loaded within the social construct of virginity and blah, 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 blah. However, what quickly takes over is the expectations about life and about ending high school and about entering adulthood. And I think what makes transitions so much fun for me to write about in particular is that there's so much stress there, which is not fun when you're going through it. But as a storyteller, then stress is like, yes, that's where the story is. Let's get some angsty teens in here, right? But specifically for that moment when you're graduating high school and maybe moving to college or getting a job or like flailing about and feeling like a failure because you don't have it figured out right. There's this myth that we continue to perpetuate that like that's the moment when your identity somehow needs to have solidified, right? You need to like know what you're going to major in. You need to have this concept of who you are, right? But like a decade later, I think adult, quote unquote, like more real adults would be the first to admit that like, we don't have any clue what's going on. Like we're kind of making it up as we're going along. And yet like there's this expectation that 18-year-olds are supposed to know what they're doing. Like it's absurd, right? And I think some of that is self-inflicted because for teens, I remember being that age and thinking like, okay, like this is when like I'm taking over, like I'm in charge. I've got to do everything right. And like the second you think you've got to do everything right, then everything falls apart. And so in The Night When No One Had Sex, it is sort of a capsule. It's sort of like a bottled timeline, right? And that it all takes place in one night. And yet we see all of those issues for 4 different characters about who they're going to be post-graduation coming to a head. And I think specifically it's not officially a rom-com because it doesn't like follow all the official romance rules, but I think of it as a rom-com in that it's very relationship based and I like to think it's funny. And so particularly for high school relationships, there's always that deadline of like graduation and now we're going across the country and what's going to happen. And that is a cloud that's looming over a lot of these characters who've been in old relationships or are maybe meeting somebody new the night of prom and realizing, oh, wait, you're leaving town next month and I'm never going to see you again. And what does that mean for how we are how we form relationships and how we kind of position ourselves like on the cusp of something else. And so, yeah, that I really like that question because I think you're right that so often when we're writing, especially for kids, we are writing about transitions because so much of childhood and teenhood and young adulthood is just transition after transition. Like we don't get to rest and just be for very long. You're always on to the next moment, which is great for writing because there's so much to explore there, right?
Thank you so much. And yes, it is actually funny. So if you had any doubt at all, you said, I think it's funny. It definitely is. I feel like I've got an objective sense about these things. And the book is actually very, very funny. So thank you for that. I'm going to give the next question to Michel. In the amalgam, characters are engaged in what is quite literally generational conflict. Older adults are actively persecuting young adults. And Riley and his peers have got to rebuild a whole social structure right down to a system of currency on their own. For me, when I was reading, I was wondering like if this same situation could happen if the aberrations were middle-aged people, or if it really is something about the age that make people more vulnerable to this kind of this kind of prejudice, really. So my question for you is, what inspired these particular battle lines, and what besides age stands in the way of your characters and their freedom?
Oh, well, there is quite a bit sitting in the way of their freedom. But as far as when we're talking about the generational gap, we do have these adults where, like I said before, you're supposed to trust them. They're supposed to be your protectors, and suddenly they're the ones coming after you. And as it progresses, you also find out that the adults know a lot more about what you are than you think. And instead of this being a one-off, it's actually happened before, but social media made it so that the world all knows about it versus what's going on now. So they have the fear of the unknown. They have that you have your haves and have-nots. The Harveys, I said before, are the ones that don't have any powers. And I will give a shout out. I was in a very small town in Iowa for high school, and for some reason we called the freshmen Harveys in basketball because they never got to play with the varsity. So I was like, you know what, shout out to Walnut, Iowa, where I ended up going to high school for a couple of years, and the poor Harveys that never got to play because they were freshmen. Anyway, sorry, so that's where I got that from. But we have the haves and have-nots. So if you don't have power, you have to be a test dummy for the people that do have power, so they can practice and work on you. And if you get blown up, sorry, but that's how you get your food credits. And I think I'm not sure that I would like to think that if it's a smaller group as middle-aged people, we would do the same things. But I think with these kids, they're collaborating all the time in school. They're collaborating all the time. That's kind of built in. I went to a Montessori school in South Minneapolis when I was younger, and I put my son had gone through that because I put him in the same school over in South Minneapolis, and it was a collaboration that I saw all these kids do, and they work together so well. So that's kind of why I think that they would come up with this new currency. And it's not really a big secret, but there's catalogs because they can't go out and shop. So in order to get anything, they have their facilitator or their grabber pull it out. So if you've got a Maxim, which has all the alcohol and all the fun stuff in it, you're very rich. If you've got, East Bay, you can get shoes. So these are the things that, they look as currency because they can't go out or they will get caught. And this generational divide really shows up in book 2 and in book 3. It intensifies because you do find out that there are older generations that just kind of let these kids get taken over, and now they're trying to come and help, and they're like, no. By the way, book 3 came out today. Anyway, so as far as yes, it's like, thank you, book 3 is out. Okay. Acceptance is the biggest thing standing in their way. Much like with any new, what would be considered a society, it's whether or not the main society will accept them. And there aren't as many of them as they think there are. And so do we accept them or don't we? And that's what's standing in their way, because society sees them as a threat. They see them as a danger. Anybody around them, they see as that. So that is what our biggest thing is. It's the fear of accepting somebody who is different from you. And these kids are all different. And in order for them to have any freedom and to live their life, is they have to be accepted, and they have to learn from the older generation that kind of left them on their own, how they were able to hide and be accepted. And so that's kind of, that would be what their freedom is going to take. And sadly, what was supposed to be a trilogy is now going to be 7 books because it takes a long time to get acceptance. But there you go. So that would be my answers, I guess, to those 2 questions.
Your readers are not going to be sad about that. Your readers are going to be really happy that there's more to read. Congratulations.
I hope so, because book 3 ends in a cliffhanger. So I'm like, I have to put the chapter 1 of book 4, or people are going to kill me because it's a really bad cliffhanger. So.
All right. Well, thank you for the warning, and congratulations on the new book today.
Thank you.
All right, Ted, I've got a question for you. Adolescence is supposed to be a time where people really start to figure out who they are. For Josie Black in The Spy Who Raised Me, you have taken self-discovery to a whole other level. Do you start a project with your characters pretty fully formed, or are you learning along with them as you go? And I'm wondering if that's any different when you're working with an illustrator or if you're working by yourself, if you are ever discovering things about a character that you didn't know when you started.
The second part is easy to answer because it kind of tacks on to the first. Absolutely, it is. Working with an illustrator changes everything about the characters as I've come up with them so far. It forces me to recontextualize, like, how does this person visually, I mean, comics is, we've kind of been talking a little bit about this with Becca, talking about comics and the ways in which it's similar to film and it's similar to the stage. One of my friends is a professional comics creator, and he majored in theater, and so a lot of times he thinks about the panel as a kind of stage, and how do you block off certain parts of it, how do you indicate scale or distance, what props do you use, that sort of thing. In my specific case, I mean, what that comes down to is that when you see who's been cast, it forces you to recontextualize, well, how do they express a particular emotion? Are they someone who's going to, very viscerally, physically act out if they're angry, or are they going to kind of sort of shut down and be, small and that sort of thing? It does change everything about how that person works as a character. But I mean, that's part of the larger process. I mean, to the larger question of whether my characters start out fully formed or not, it is definitely the case for me so far that my characters have grown over time in the books that I've worked on, where they have changed quite dramatically, or at the very least I have kind of had to reframe how I think of them. Are they stupid? Are they stupider than I thought they would be? I'm working on a book right now in which the main character has kind of turned out to be a himbo in a way that I didn't expect him to. And it's like, well, that actually works pretty well. Let's make him a himbo. Let's lean into that. And that's a book where we're actually talking to an artist right now. And so waiting to see what they come up with is going to make me question again, how is this character going to look? That way. And even just the very smallest things can affect how you write a character or how that character gets perceived. I mean, something that it kind of took me a while to realize really factored into how JB, how she reads in the comic, is that she's ever so slightly shorter than her friend Zoe, who's basically there with her with the entire book, 2/3 of the book. Spoilers. And even though JB is the one who's the more competent one, because she has all these super spy skills programmed into her, she's still not the most physically sort of imposing one. And so there's this disconnect between the fact that, like, oh, she can pick locks and hack computers and things like that, but she doesn't know how she can do it. And she's a little bit sort of on the back foot for most of that book because she's not aware of everything that she has the potential for. And just something as simple as a height difference can help emphasize that level of, like, you don't really know what you can do. You don't really have any idea of what your full potential is until, the very end of the book, even, or beyond, really. Yeah, I mean, that's a long-winded way to say that no, I don't really know what my characters are going to be at the beginning of the book, because by the end of it, it's something entirely different. Another book I'm working on right now, it's become a comedy by the end of it, and I was like, I didn't really expect it to be quite so funny. It's a weird experience.
Well, thank you very much. And now you've made us all really interested in your new himbo. Whenever we will meet your new characters.
Yeah, sorry to do the self-promotional thing here. You can see it in the fall of 2024.
Everyone should do a self-promotional thing, and that's a great segue for my last round robin question for you. And this is a question for everyone, and a great time to talk about what you're working on. What is something that you found yourself having to Google that you didn't expect you were going to have to Google, either for the project you're working on now or the project that we're talking about? And I think we will start with Alan for that one.
I will talk about what Wanderlust is doing, but I do want to give Becca and Leah a chance to just quickly answer that, because I'm sure that Becca's working on something also that is she's probably Googled something strange. So I'll let her speak first, and then Leah if she wants, and then I'll go last.
Okay. Oh, well, I have two answers. For a project I just recently finished, the best thing I got to Google was, how do you draw a pierogi? That was something I had to Google. and it was, I had to be sure. It looks a little different than a calzone. But for an upcoming project, I've had to Google, what plants would one find around an ancient Celtic relic? Exciting evenings at my place. I'm gonna toss it back to Alan.
Leah, did you want to say anything, or should I just?
I could say something. So I guess at the moment, it turns out I'm accidentally working on a memoir about my own experience as an adoptee. And recently I Googled the name of my own godmother because I grew up hearing stories about her being a Hollywood actress. But I also had really untrustworthy narrators in my family. And so I was actually writing a section of the book that is about growing up surrounded by untrustworthy narratives, unreliable narratives, I guess. And as I was starting to write about my godmother, I realized I don't even know if what was told to me about her was true. So I Googled her, and it turned out all that I was told was true and more. She's a really interesting character. So that was a fun surprise.
And I'll just say, so Wanderlust is a theater company, and we're constantly making shows, and we're currently working on one about the incarceration system. So talk about secrets. That is a system that is designed so that we don't know anything about it. It is intentionally kept away. So we've created a play called The Labyrinth and the Minotaur. So we use that story to contain stories from inmates and former inmates and corrections officers and the administrators and activists and family members. And we're working on it right now. We're in rehearsal, and we started it like 4 years ago. And the beginning of the play is a kind of soundscape of all the words that are unique to this world of incarceration that most of us don't know. And when we wrote the script 3 years ago, we had a list of definitions from people that we talked to, but now it's been so long we can't remember. So we were Googling in rehearsal with the cast were things like smuggle juice and potato logs and LOP, which means loss of privileges, and various other sort of words. There's so many of them that people know if they unfortunately have to live in this world. So we are actually going to have a chapter, a graphic novel chapter of the play available at the production, which will be in May. So hopefully people will come check that out, and then maybe we hope there'll be a book of that as well. And I'll be basically for the next couple months frantically Googling words to make sure we're using them correctly.
All right, Ted, do you have anything that you are surprised to have to learn for your current project?
The dam and reservoir system of the Tennessee Valley Authorities. That's okay. That's for one book. I have another one where I've also been researching common costume making techniques, which is not something I knew anything about. And is there what did I research for that third one? Common side effects of anti-anxiolytics. So yeah, a whole lot of random researches along the way, but yep.
All right, that sounds enlightening. Michelle?
Let's see. Well, probably the most interesting thing that was for a book that's been out for a while now was actually trying to find various mass murder sites. I know it sounds weird, but it's where people just snapped. There's a great book called Hatred where they talk about how an entire town in Poland literally overnight went from 3,200 to 1,600 people because people all just killed everybody. Nobody talks about it. And yeah, so that was for a paranormal book. And when I write, I'm a history major originally, history and political science. So I love looking up the history and making sure that I can, especially if it's paranormal, make people think, well, maybe that actually is going on. That's kind of my thing with that. Right now for this series, I am looking at sanitariums from the early 20s because, there's a little time jump going on. And then for my other books, right now I'm looking into the Navy SEALs and trying to find their little mottos, seeing if I can find some little silent mottos or something like that, because I write mostly romance and I've got a bunch of MC guys and they're all in the military. So I'm always looking up different military things. But yeah, I love tying in history to make people question if that actually, oh wait, maybe this actually could have happened. And there's a lot of history in the amalgam, and it's going to continue with the rest of the series. So
Awesome. Kalena, you learned anything new?
Sorry, I was Googling that book in Poland. Holy shit. That's insane. I'm going to restart that introduction again. What did you ask me? Did I learn something new? Yeah, so my next book is a middle grade novel that is coming out in spring of 2023. So next spring. It's called Shannon and the Spotlights. It is a contemporary novel about being a preteen with OCD and messy friendships and community theater. And in that vein, I guess this wasn't surprising, but I spent a lot of time watching some very bad productions of The Sound of Music, just to get a whole lot of different staging ideas. And you know, once you're watching Liesel and Rolf over and over and over again, it's just kind of like there's no good version, right? So I watched a lot of Sound of Music in preparation, but also then because I just got into it, you know.
Right, thank you for those good answers. I will tell you that the things I've been Googling lately include how to commit Social Security fraud and what else can I burn in a crematorium besides just a body. So I swear that they are book related questions, but I also feel like I need to probably destroy my laptop when I'm done with this project. Thank you to all of our tremendous young adult literature finalists and to everyone watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a whole library of past author events and conversations on the YouTube channel of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. If you want to learn about future programs happening online or in real life, you can check out their website, thefriends.org. And please come to the Minnesota Book Awards ceremony on Tuesday, April 26th. That's when the winner in this category and 8 other categories will be revealed. Join us online or at the Ordway Center for Performing Arts in St. Paul. This will be the first in-person book award event since 2019, and you will find some very excited readers, writers, and book people getting together. Tickets are just $22, and you can visit thefriends.org/MNBA for all the details. For now, I hope we've left you with lots of good ideas for your next great read. Thank you, Ted, Leah, Alan, Becca, Michelle, and Kalena for sharing your stories.